I'm looking forward to hearing from the makers today, how they experienced these past years and how they created the exhibition, which I strongly hope will be open to the public soon. I would like to thank Valika Smeulders, Eveline Sint Nicolaas, Maria Holtrop, and Stephanie Archangel for working with us in making this meeting possible for you. They will be further introduced by our relatively new member, CODART member, Adam Harris Levine. He is assistant curator of European art at the Art Gallery of Ontario in Toronto, Canada, where he is responsible for European art from the Middle Ages through the Baroque. Levine holds degrees from McGill University, the Courtauld Institute of Art, and Columbia University. Adam, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for joining us today. The exhibition is, frankly, to my mind, groundbreaking and a really radical moment in the role of museums in society and the way that we face history and how it informs the world that we live in today. So I'm so pleased to be here today and playing a role in facilitating today's event. I'm just going to offer some practical instructions and we'll review the flow of events. So we will have an overview of the exhibition from Maria. Then I will ask the curators a series of questions. And then finally, we will open the floor to questions. Please use the raise hand function to signal that you would like to speak. I will now introduce the four curators. Eveline Sint Nicolaas is the chief curator of the exhibition. Her knowledge and contacts are mainly in Suriname, the Caribbean, and Brazil. In 2018, she published her book, Chains and Bands, about the shared history of Suriname and the Netherlands based on the Rijksmuseum's collection. Stephanie Archangel joined the history department as the junior curator for the 80 Years War exhibition and was subsequently added to the team for the slavery exhibition. In addition to her content contribution, she maintains many contacts with organizations with whom the museum works, such as the Black Archives and the marketing agency Boomerang. Earlier this year, she made the exhibition Black in Rembrandt's Time in Rembrandt's House about the presence of Black people in Western art in the 17th century. I'm sure I'm not the only one who has the catalog on my desk right now. This is, of course, one of the exhibitions that many of us in North America were devastated not to travel to during the pandemic. I'm so glad that we have events like this to allow us to connect. Maria Holtrop collaborated on the Good Hope exhibition and publication in 2017 and has extended her knowledge and contacts with South Africa for the slavery exhibition to Indonesia. She has also directed the End Slavery Project, which runs parallel to the exhibition, and through 80 additional texts signed near objects in the permanent collection, the permanent presentation, points out to visitors the connection to slavery. And Valika Smeulders has studied and worked on slavery exhibitions since 2001. She wrote a doctoral thesis on the presentation of slavery and its past in museums in different parts of the world and the audiences that these exhibitions relate to. In this exhibition, she is responsible for the stories of different people who spoke up against the system, such as Sapali, Tula, Dirk, and Loke, and the story of the African servant in the Netherlands, Paulus. So first, to kind of give us all the necessary context so that we can get a sense of the exhibition, Maria is going to give us an overview, and then we will begin questions.
So I wanted to start with this picture of the Rijksmuseum with the banner for the exhibition, because it says Slavery Rijksmuseum and Expected. Because as in many parts of the world, we are still waiting for the museum to open so that the exhibition on slavery that we worked on for the past 4 years can finally be seen by the public. I would like to use the next 15 minutes to give you a brief idea of our exhibition, the concept, the objects and sources we have selected. Next slide, please. So this is us, the curators, 4 women with backgrounds in sociology, cultural studies, history, museum studies, Curaçao, Suriname, the Netherlands, and so many more areas. Valika is also head of the history department and Eveline leads our team. But let's start with the setup of the exhibition. Next slide. Between the 16th and 19th centuries, under Dutch rule, people in countries around the Atlantic and Indian Ocean were forced into slavery. And that new economic world system also changed the Netherlands itself. Our exhibition takes you to that colonial period and shows what it was like to those who experienced it. To make this history relatable to all of our visitors, we decided to focus on 10 personal true stories of people who were held in slavery, who were slaveholders, and those who spoke out against the system. Next slide, please. So the exhibition starts with a number of introductory rooms that focus on the system of colonial slavery and the sources that are available. In the atrium that you see here, bells from all over the world are on display. They come from Indonesia, Guyana, Suriname, Curacao, South Africa, and were used on plantations to indicate the rhythm of the working day. The sound of the bells carried far was a practical way to reach many people over a longer distance. But for people in slavery, the sound became associated with violence, with punishment. At the end of each day, it was determined whether enough had been harvested, and if not, punishment was followed. This shows how it matters from which perspective you look at history, or at objects like these bells, as they have a different meaning for slaveholders and enslaved. Next slide, please. When you enter the first gallery, you will hear and see 3 texts of songs that originated in slavery and tell about the experience of slavery. They are songs from Curaçao, Suriname, and South Africa. These songs are about the pain of parents who couldn't protect their children, of families being ripped apart, and the feeling to be seen as no more than a tool. They tell us more about the lives of the enslaved than the golden box in the middle that was presented to Stadtholder William IV when he became Commander-in-Chief of the Dutch West India Company, which is on view in the next gallery. By starting the exhibition with songs, we wanted to make a statement that in order to tell the stories of the enslaved, we need to complement our material collection with oral sources. Next slide, please. The next gallery is dedicated to the installation La Bouche du Roi by the Beninese artist Romuald Hazoumé. It is about the hardship of the journey across the ocean, leaving family, culture, and language behind on the way to an unknown place in life. Hazoumé used 304 petrol cans. Each can has unique features and represents a human being with a name, a voice, a culture. There are smaller masks for the women and children, and broken ones for those who died along the way. Sounds and smells also have an important part in this installation, and there's a video that shows the effect of this history on present-day Benin, of the people that were left behind. It is a very impressive multi-layered installation. The last of the introductory galleries is about what happened to the men, women, and children who survived this crossing. They were sold on arrival, often branded, and opposed new names such as Lucky or Fortune. They were made into objects. In the following galleries, we tell the stories of 10 historical individuals that were part of the slavery system. Next slide, please. So these are the 10 names, and I'm very sorry that I can't go really deep into them, but I would just give you a small overview. The first 5 stories focus on living within the system of slavery. So we have João, who is an enslaved African man in Brazil. Wally, who was born into slavery in Suriname. Paulus, an African servant in the Netherlands. Opien, who profited from slavery, and that we know from her portrait by Rembrandt. And Van Bengalen. They are the enslaved people who were shipped from the Bay of Bengal in northeast India by the Dutch East India Company to Batavia, Banda Islands, the Cape in South Africa, and Dokkum in the Netherlands. The second 5 stories are about fighting the system and striving for freedom and equal treatment. Surapati, he is now Indonesia's national hero, but he was an enslaved servant in Batavia who fought against the Dutch East India Company and became a ruler of a kingdom on Java. Sapali was a maroon woman in Suriname. She hid unpeeled rice in her hair as a survival strategy. Tula, on Curaçao, aimed to change the colonial system from within. Dirk was a Dutch abolitionist who owned enslaved people himself. And finally, Loke, a female freedom fighter from Sint Maarten. As you can understand, it was quite a puzzle to come to these 10. We looked for a balance in geographical location and gender, and stories about enslaved people as well as people who profited from the system. Next slide, please. When making an exhibition on slavery, objects that tell the story of the enslaved are difficult to find. Enslaved people were not allowed to have property and often were forbidden to read and write. The objects that can tell the history of slavery are likely to be tainted by colonialism. So how do you do justice to the lives of the enslaved people through objects? Here you see a few examples. At the center of the story of João is this tronco, or multiple footstock. It is an object of violence that was missing in our collection until now. It was used on Brazilian plantations to lock people up as punishment, but it was made in the Netherlands. This tronco is a special donation to the museum, and because it's a donation, we will be able to give the story of slavery a place in the museum's permanent presentation after the exhibition. The work on the plantation is reflected through the kapa, a large iron kettle used in Suriname, in which the sugarcane juice was further distilled. In the middle, you see sapali rice, a type only found in West Africa and Suriname. Because rice is not only smuggled from the plantation to freedom, but already before that, across the Atlantic Ocean. Genetically, this stock stems directly from the grains that Sapali, one of the 10 individuals, wove into her hair. We have also found objects that reflect intangible cultural knowledge of medicinal plants or music instruments, such as the mouth bow. In the story of Surapati, we can show the Javanese perspective on this story through 18th century Javanese books called babats, here on the right. More problematic are the archival documents. They give glimpses of the lives of enslaved people and tell us something about the hardships they encountered. Sometimes an enslaved person is even quoted, like in the interrogation of the enslaved Bali, one of our 10 stories. But we should never lose out of sight that those quotes have been written down by white colonial men in an unequal power situation. So, to get closer to the experience of the enslaved, we therefore also use oral sources, such as the songs earlier mentioned and interviews. A woman who was born in slavery and tells about her grandmother who was enslaved as well, gives us a direct link to the experience of slavery. And also the songs in the first gallery tell us about the pain, despair, and worry people in slavery must have felt. Next slide, please. These oral sources made it necessary for us to make an audio tour which is free for all visitors. Glenn Helberg, here on the left, upper left, is a Dutch psychiatrist who specializes in transcultural therapy, and he takes the visitor through the exhibition. Each of the 10 stories is told by a different narrator, people who are connected to these historical individuals because of their name, roots, or family history. These 10 narrators make it clear to the visitor that the history of slavery is not only something of the past, but continues to influence our lives today, and that the history of slavery is a history of all of us. Next slide, please. Finally, it was important to us to have a place at the end of the exhibition where visitors could do something with the probably hard emotional experience they had when they had gone through. To not just say thank you, goodbye, but let them have the final word and an opportunity to express their feelings or thoughts. That is why we conclude the exhibition with Look at Me Now, a cooperation with artists Tirza Marta and David Bade of Instituto Bonavista from Curaçao. Visitors are invited to work with them on 10 new artworks based on the 10 stories from the exhibition. That way, new objects will be added to the sources available to tell this history. Next, please. To have this exhibition be finally ready for the public makes it seem it was always there, but that is not the case at all. For the last 4 years, we have spent most of the time trying to find a way to do justice to this history while using structures that aren't designed to do this history justice. For days and days, we have talked, discussed, and argued about stretching up the limits of an exhibition and what it can show. During the making of this exhibition, we have tried to be as transparent as possible and take as many people as possible with us in the process. We were followed by a documentary crew, had talks and discussions with people from outside the museum, but also with our traditional stakeholders, for example, the Friends of the Museum. In a couple of well-attended meetings, we could explain them things as why an exhibition on slavery was necessary and the importance of terminology and different perspectives. But also internally, we try to be as transparent as possible. We had meetings with our director every month, made video clips for our colleagues to tell them about our exhibition, and tested our plans with colleagues in test panels. So how can we make this project durable? We don't want everything to go back to normal after we close the exhibition. So an important part in this is our permanent display in the main building, where not a lot of attention is given to slavery. As a first step, we decided to research the objects in our main building and see what links there were with slavery. This resulted in 78 new labels that are hung next to the regular ones for a year. They will show the ways people in the Netherlands profited from slavery or were connected to slavery, and the presence of Black people in the Netherlands. After this year, we will remove them and make new labels that will combine both the old and the new texts. After the exhibition, new acquisitions as the kappa and the tronco will also be displayed in the permanent galleries. Through the years, this project became bigger and bigger, so I could have told you about so many more elements to this project. Hopefully, you will be able to come and visit the exhibition when the museum is allowed to open again. If not, we have made video tours for the website that show the 10 different stories and give you an idea of the exhibition. And of course, there is also the book. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria. I think that given that you've all worked so collaboratively, if it's okay, I'll pose my questions to all four of you and let you decide who is best to answer, or if you want to answer all together. But the first question I have is that at the outset of the exhibition's development, you challenged a popular but untested notion, which is that the Rijksmuseum's collection maybe didn't contain the objects necessary to tell the story of Dutch slavery. And you found frankly, the opposite, right? So can you tell us about the discovery process that you undertook to see the same collection in a new light? And do you have any suggestions for curators who are looking to perform a similar sort of re-inventorying of their own collection?
Yeah, I think I'll take this answer. Well, it was interesting because our main presentation is built around the idea of having a chronological history of the Netherlands. So while we were researching slavery, it made a lot of sense that there were a lot of connections to slavery, because Dutch history is very much connected to slavery, although albeit hidden. So at some point, especially in the 18th century, if we had an object that wasn't connected to slavery, we wouldn't trust it. We would think, we don't have researched it enough. And I think that was our starting point from the beginning, that we wanted to show that slavery is such a big part of Dutch history and is connected to so many elements of Dutch history, and that it showed through to through the objects in our main exhibition, or in our main presentation.
I think that's a great point, that the link between enslavement and the history of a country like the Netherlands is inextricable, and I'm not sure that we've all adapted quickly enough to think in that sort of almost forensic way of examining objects that are not transparently about enslavement, to look beyond. At the core of your exhibition, there's a desire to humanize and give names and identities and narratives to some of the millions of people who were dehumanized or objectified in the Dutch Empire. I wonder if you can tell us about one of your protagonists for whom the archive was particularly rich and descriptive, and another where you found that it was much more minimal, and sort of how you worked with these two different kinds of archival sources.
I'll take this question. I think it's a necessity to realize that you also have to problematize these archives. So at one point you have archives, but they were only used for the West Indian Company and the East Indian Company, in the sense to get informed, espionage, or at the other side to criminalize the enslaved person. So even when, for example, like Wally, you find quotes of him, it's still the company trying to build, in that sense, a legal case against these people that have stood up for their rights, as one would say. So that's the archives, but at the same time, I think it's especially an influence that we've had from Valika. So we really try to look into how do you find oral stories that have survived. In that sense, you don't learn a lot about that person, for example, like Sapali. You don't know how old she was, how she came there. We don't have any quotes of her. So in that sense, about her, it's very, very limited, but she carries such a big story of resilience, strategy, and survival that that oral story then again also becomes very important for the exhibition. So we try to play or look at both ways of introducing people.
I noticed that, you know, for some of the characters or protagonists that you chose, you have portraits, and in other instances you have no surviving portrait. And I wonder, what sort of strategies do you use to give people a face or something to look at, to allow people to feel that kind of person-to-person connection? You know, did you sort of grapple with this by using imagery of nameless people that sort of aligned with the archive, and, you know, what you sort of think that person, you know, is something that closely matched, or how do you sort of deal with this absence of images?
Yeah, maybe I can take that question. We dealt with that in several different ways according to the person. For example, with Sapali, we discovered that this person who was only known through oral history, that she had a connection to one of the maps in our collection, because that map displayed the group of people she belonged to on the run. And you see distinctive female figures on that map. So you can wonder, did the person who painted that map, could he have seen Sapali or not? So that brings you closer together with the other objects we are using. In other cases, we used photography. In Tula, for example, again, we use oral history to get closer to the experience of people. And the oral history speaks a lot about, it shows you that people were very much aware of the unfairness of the whole system. The inequality, that it speaks of hope, of people keeping alive that idea of one day that freedom will come. So we used an early photograph of someone taken in the early 19th century, and you can just imagine that that man must have been born around the time that the struggle of Tula took place. And you can see this intense look on his face, and you can just imagine what he grew up with, the stories he was told, the hope he kept alive. So yeah, we used different strategies for each of our 10 persons.
Eveline, please unmute yourself. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, maybe I had to think of a discussion we had with the designer of the exhibition and the four of us as curators, that we were thinking about, shouldn't we make or give a commission to an artist to make a portrait of Tula, for example, that we have no portrait of. But we decided that it wouldn't be, that there's a reason why there is no portrait. And it's better to show that reason than to fill in the gap. And I think it's wonderful that a rice can be a portrait as well in the case of Sapali. And I think that's a different way of looking at and maybe adjusting your ideas of what you should need to have a feeling or an idea of a person. So that's, I think was a good decision not to do so.
I think that makes perfect sense. The fact that images of these people do not survive is the direct result of a form of archival violence. And if you if you try to fill that void, it's almost about assuaging people's feelings of guilt when they're in the gallery, or trying to minimize the fact that this is violent. And so that feels like such a wonderful act of restraint to say, we have to sit with the fact that you may want to see this person, but we will never be able to recover this identity in its totality. I think that makes perfect sense. In the catalog, you mentioned that one of your collaborators called the Rijksmuseum a temple of colonial self-aggrandizement. Which, by the way, I mean, one of the reasons that I think that this exhibition is radical is that I could understand the impulse to have that conversation with an external group and then not publish that, to simply, to not include that, but to say, it seems like you all really grapple with everything that you're sort of up against when you, in a very transparent way. But so I wonder, I think that a lot of institutions wonder if they are the right or the wrong site for decolonial healing, given that they themselves are inherently colonial institutions or have deep colonial histories. Can you tell us about the process that you went through to confirm that the Rijksmuseum could be a successful home for this exhibition?
Yeah. I think the first thing you need to do is to realize that and just recognize that, and that's okay. This history is a shared history in the sense that there are no groups that are not connected to it. So the Rijksmuseum needs to tell this history as much as a new museum would have done this. But at the same time, we were aware that there was a lot of knowledge on this history that was not part of what the museum had already. So we needed to forge these collaborations from every department from the museum itself. And that's what we did. And by realizing that this building was not meant to display the story of the people that were enslaved, that the people who were oppressed, made us work with an architect that could realize that transformation. So Afina de Jong, who we worked with, she thought about what the building does to a visitor, how the locations where slavery took place, what did they look like, the places where people were sold, where people were working, where they lived. And she brought that into the museum, not in a literal sense, but in a sense that you can just get in touch with those different realities through different sizes, through colors. And she makes you realize that there's a connection between the past and the present, between what we were able to see, what remained unseen. So it really triggers to rethink a lot of what you take for granted, and what we should look further for us to be able to see that. So I think the recognition was really important.
I think that this exhibition really is, when I think about all of our colleagues that are here from museums across Europe and North America and beyond, I think this exhibition really is an invitation to everyone to lean in to this work and to say that, no institution can sit this out. And that I think institutions are really dynamic and constantly changing. This is certainly, you've shown us this in so many ways. I wonder, are there ways that the Rijksmuseum was sort of so stuck in its ways, or that you had to sort of, I don't know, intervene in the bureaucracy to make an exhibition that is like this one? Or, how does this sort of represent a radical intervention in the way that the museum works? And do you think it will work differently after this exhibition? Oh no, but
I think it's an ongoing process. So as Valika said, and I said in my introduction, the whole idea of the museum is not fit to tell this story, but we have decided that we want something different, and that we want to build something different that is fit to tell the story, but we don't know yet what that means. And I think in the process you tend to find yourself a way where you think, oh yeah, well maybe if we move this way, yeah, then there is a possibility, but then something else happens and you're like, oh no, we're back at the same thing again. Oh no, this is not good. So I think we are really trying to find our ways, as the curators, but also the whole institution.
And I think at the same time, I agree with Maria, we have not invented the wheel here. So
no.
I would really rather be open about our process, which is what we try to do in the film New Light. So you can see our struggle, you can see our doubts, and you can see our fears. And that will be a part of what we take with us in the future as well. And we hope to keep growing and adding to what we know and learning by seeing others working on the same things as well. And actually, we can't wait for the next exhibition.
And things we are now able to do, we are part able because there has been an exhibition about Good Hope, for example, about South Africa. We've learned from. So many projects that haven't got the attention the slavery exhibition is having now, but it's all part of a process that takes already a couple of years, of course, before we could come to this point. And there are next exhibitions to come that can make use of the things we have changed along the way. But we're not satisfied and leaning back. It's ongoing work.
And I think what was also necessary was brutal honesty towards everyone and each other. In that sense, not always the funnest way to work, but it needed to be done. So we took that upon ourselves to be honest and constantly be critical and honest in everything we try to do. And the whole museum actually was doing the same.
Well, I know that you also at the beginning established a think tank of external colleagues to advise on the project. And so I wonder if you can tell us a bit about getting honesty from that group, also seeking feedback and casting a wide net in terms of perspectives.
Yeah, I think that's something we started really early in the process, that we thought with the group of curators and our former head of history, Martine Gosselink, that it was good to have a think tank, people from outside the museum who could be of help along the way. And it was it is a very nice group. I think we're 15 altogether. It's experts from both the transatlantic slavery history and the Indian Ocean region, which is very important to bring these two experts together, because it's the first exhibition that the combination is made, and we're not all experts. Valika is our best expert in this field, but we're not this sort of knowledge center of slavery in the Netherlands. So we felt we really need a group of people who could help us along the process. So academics, activists, young, less young, women, men. We made a whole a good group, I think. And the wonderful thing about it is that we had 5 meetings and they were live. Can you imagine? We had live meetings in the museum, which was of great value because we had all our one-to-one contacts with academics and with people in this think tank. But it was really very useful, valuable to have this group together and discuss things as a group, see that dynamic. We learned a lot about that. the first session, I remember we presented our concept of personal stories. We didn't want to give names because we didn't want to have a discussion about it, went deep into the choice we made, but we really wanted to know of this group, if this was even if they thought it was possible to make an exhibition on slavery with these personal stories. We also discussed about the combination, of course, of transatlantic and Indian Ocean slavery, the tax labels, the educational plan. And I think sometimes it was difficult. We had so much to tell that we often had meetings of an hour and a half or two. And we really had to warn each other that we shouldn't be talking that hour and a half, but that it was really something that we should use this group to get some response and we should give them some possibility to reflect, of course. And well, that worked, and it was really, I think, very useful. Also, because sometimes as curators we could say, but the think tank advised us, and then we could use that if we really wanted in the museum, or to really press our points and say this is important, and we have our think tank backing us up. So that was I think it made us stronger in this whole journey of making the exhibition, and that's why I would recommend to have that every curator or every exhibition should make use of a group like this, because they also represent the audience we want to reach, and they represent society in a way. So it also helps you to get a bit out of your bubble.
Some curators are wary of showing violent depictions of slavery for fear of triggering or further traumatizing racialized audiences. I wonder if this is something that came up in your planning process. Are there images that were sort of too violent or too ugly to show? And how did you sort of come to a consensus around how to display and contextualize images of that type?
Yeah, I think it's extremely difficult when it comes to showing objects that have violence and aggression in them. There's a fine line. So I think for us, it was important that we kept asking ourselves, why are we showing this and for whom? So in that sense, when you look at the tronco, for example, we wanted to show that because we also want to show that there were instruments used in slavery to oppress people. And I think it was difficult because also when you look at Black Lives Matter, it's stating that trauma isn't something from the past. It's very much alive, so alive that you could actually YouTube it and see violence used against the Black body. So in times like these, you have to be extremely careful in how you do this. So we try to really think about it and try to think of almost compose it in the exhibition, thinking how much of these, well, it's more for who and why. We constantly said who and why. Yeah.
I think that makes perfect sense. And I've heard you elsewhere, Stephanie, speak really candidly about the fact that, that you worked on this exhibition thinking about a Black audience.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, yes. I never forget the other audience, but who I'm trying to represent in that sense, for me, is the Black audience, but never forgetting, of course, that there's not only just Black people coming to see the exhibition.
Of course,
so
I think that makes perfect sense.
You constantly have to switch in between these. Yeah, but it's mostly the group that I try to represent in my work.
I think what's always also worth mentioning here is that the whole concept of having 10 central figures and really diving into those individual human stories makes it different if you think about the balance between different kinds of objects. So if you would do an exhibition that would draw the broad strokes of slavery history, then you need to balance those objects that are about the romanticization of that period and about the wealth and really make heroes of the people that were the aggressors of that period. Then you need to balance that with other objects that show that it had everything to do with violence and structural violence. But since the emotion in this case, in this exhibition, is all about the human experience. Have the visitor relate to what would you do if you had been in the shoes of that person. That's where the emotion comes in, and that's where the historical sensation comes in. So I think you need to rethink those balances in every exhibition you do.
That makes.
Is it not also true that we try to also go beyond slavery only being about violence, but also putting people at center stage that show resilience through that system of violence? Yeah. And I think we try to also balance that. So it's not only about the shackle, it's also about the person that endured it and made a life for its own, although there were shackles. I'm not sure if I'm saying this correctly, but
I think I understand, because the exhibition seems incredibly holistic in terms of this capacity to examine the system from many different stories. And yeah, no, I think that makes perfect sense. Eveline alluded to this earlier, but I think one thing that comes out of the exhibition that's very exciting and important for the research that will become more public facing is just that enslavement in the Atlantic world has received more attention than in scholarship and in the popular world than slavery in Asia. And your exhibition looks at both geographies. And so what are key takeaways that you hope your colleagues and your audiences will learn about enslavement in Asia and its connections to the Dutch East India Company?
Yeah, so that was my part in the exhibition. It was difficult because we had to pick one person, but then that person had to take on its shoulder this whole history, and there's just not a lot of Dutch people that know about the connection of slavery and the Dutch East India Company. So therefore, I tried to broaden this idea, and instead of using one person, I chose a group of people, just to have visitors not thinking at the end of the exhibition, okay, so there was this one servant from Batavia, so Dutch East India slavery is all about servants in the house. So I wanted to give this broader scope and also show how much intertwined slavery and exploitation of people is with these trade companies like the Dutch East India Company and like the Dutch West India Company, and how they are in a sense very much alike. There's of course a lot of differences, but they stem from this similar idea of wanting to make profit through exploitation, and therefore I hope that after seeing this, people can't think about the Dutch spices or the spices from the Indies without thinking about the slavery and the human exploitation that was connected to it.
Thank you. While slavery was formally not legal in the Netherlands, it was still practiced, and that's very much borne out in the exhibition. And so I think the formal prohibition of slavery in the Netherlands has led to some confusion amongst scholars and the public audiences. This is sort of dispense with in your exhibition, what are some other popular mythologies or misunderstandings that the exhibition will correct for your audiences?
Well, let me get into that aspect of it not being legal in the Netherlands first. I mean, slavery and unfree labor are recurrent phenomena all over the world. We see it occurring in every day and age in modern times as well. So at the end of the Middle Ages, it existed in Europe, but it was kind of banned. And it was only when ships went out and saw that in other parts of the world it would be very profitable to start plantations for produce that was not produced in Europe itself, that slavery again became very profitable, and the idea of doing that to people that looked differently was easier than to doing it to your own people. So that's what we bring across in the exhibition, and that is also the context in which we present that one servant who was taken from Africa, brought into the Netherlands, who was legally not enslaved, but he was made to wear a collar around his neck. So that gets you thinking, okay, so it was not legal here, but how were these people treated? And what did that do to somebody like that? And what does that do to the way we see that was the start of diversity in Dutch society? I mean, we look at colored people of Dutch descent, or Dutch people of African descent, as people that are the migrators in the 20th century. But actually in the 17th century, there were always Afro-Dutch people here. So it makes you rethink that, and we hope to be challenging in that. And if you ask me what other challenges do we pose, I think one other popular misconception is the idea that that whole system of slavery was never questioned during that time, that abolitionism was something that came at the end of that long period of 250 years. Well, we think it is something that when the system was started, it was already questioned by people on the councils, for example. But it was something that was questioned by people from every ethnicity, every background during those 2.5 centuries. The thing is that the balance between the economic interest and those counter voices was not as such that it could bring that change. It lasted a long time until change was finally there. But those voices, and I think the realization of the enslaved people themselves, they always knew that they were human beings and not objects. So I think that is one misconception that we really like to challenge.
I realize that all four of you come from different methodological backgrounds, different personal backgrounds. You bring different experiences to this project as co-curators. And also that all four of you come from the history department of the Rijksmuseum, and we're speaking mostly to a group of art historians. And so I think there's some really fascinating, like both methodological and also thinking about the personal ways that we approach exhibition making, issues to unpack it. I wonder, maybe the easiest question I could ask is, this makes sense to me that it comes out of your history department rather than an art department. But I wonder, do you think a similar exhibition could ever have been done if it were sort of rooted in art? Or what can curators of art, colleagues across museums, learn and take away from your exhibition to make radical change in their own displays that are rooted in art methodologies? I'm sorry, that was a very long rambling question. But
I
does
think
any of that make sense?
No, it does. I mean, Stephanie and I talked about this question because we found it very interesting. Also because we are not in that world. We are very lucky that the Rijksmuseum contains both history or art history and history, and we are always within our own historical bubble, looking outwards. And in that bubble, it makes total sense that you center narratives and stories instead of portraits and genres. But I think there is a shift going on there where art historical exhibitions also have narratives at heart, and try to look more at individual stories and personal stories. And I think actually that Stephanie's exhibition, Black and Rehrman's Time, is an example of how something that is very art historical on the one hand is also very rooted in the now and in sociological and historical processes. So I think it's a beautiful example of the combination of many disciplinaries, and I think that's the key, that there is no historical exhibition without art, and there's probably no art historical exhibition without history.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think that at least what art historians could take away from this exhibition is that we've tried to question the context. I mean, the societal relevance is why you're making an exhibition. Things like aesthetics, they don't just exist, they exist within societal context. So we have taken that societal context for granted, as if we've known all along who is represented and what their thoughts were and what was there all the time. So you can question that. Do we really know? What do we see? What don't we see? What have we not questioned yet? So I think both the historical section and the art historical section fare well with questioning, asking themselves more questions.
I think as activists from the Netherlands have sort of disabused us of the term the golden age for Dutch art, and helped us to sort of move away from this language, I hope that your exhibition and the publication, and as people have time to learn from it, we'll see, as we said at the top of this discussion, that it's almost impossible to think about art from this period without having a direct or a very strong indirect link to enslavement and to this economy, in such a way that it should be quite hard, I think, to ever talk about art from a purely formal perspective, or to talk about portraiture without thinking about the money and yeah, exactly, the sort of systems of patronage. Stephanie, I saw you unmuted yourself.
No, I think it's interesting because there's always, in that sense, two sides to every story, and none of them are true, none of them are wrong or good. In that sense, they just exist next to each other at the same time. In that sense, so you only give a broader story if you use both sides of that story, instead of just only looking at one. You add something to that history, make it more complex and interesting, in my point of view.
I think that's wonderful, and I think our audiences have demonstrated again and again that they want complexity, that they, desire many different, the access to many different ways of seeing a thing. So I wonder, maybe now is an appropriate time to invite our audience to, if you want to turn on your cameras, if you have questions, please use the raise hand function, and I can call on you, and we'd love to hear from you to join the conversation.
Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation, Adam. You've done a wonderful job moderating it, and I've so enjoyed all of your contributions. Oh, sorry, Dennis, didn't raise my virtual hand. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit, because you've spoken so nicely about about the audience and how audience focused this is. and what kind of maybe measures you're putting in place to gauge audience feedback, not just by the end of the exhibition, that nice sort of collaborative installation, but how you're going to be talking to your audiences about this as well, through surveys or interviews, or I mean, just sort of gauging the success, I guess, and the thoughts and reflections.
Well, maybe I can answer that. Thank you for the question. And it's a good one because we've been thinking a lot about it. I mean, what we would really like to do is to not engage a new audience just for this one exhibition. We would like these new people to join our regular audiences and become part of a much more diverse regular audience group for the Rijksmuseum. So what we wanted to do is to make it a conversation that is continuous. So we were lucky enough that a lot of people approach us by email because we've been transparent about this road to making the exhibition. So that brought us a lot of new contacts. Our networks are much more expanded. The reason we brought in Tirso Marta and David Bade was because we wanted audiences not just to speak to us like we are the experts and they are the audience, but we wanted them in a participatory way. We want them to be the producers of what new audiences will see as well. So that was part of the way we engage with that. And yes, we are working as well on how to continue presenting this history in other ways. Maria already told you about the extra text placards that will be in our main building. So those will be ways of continuing the conversation as well. So that these new people will become part of what we are presenting in from now on. Is that an answer to your question?
I think if it's okay, I'll follow up with that question. I know that some of you are involved in a committee on language at the Rijksmuseum, updating language and looking at antiquated language where it's present. And I wonder if any of you can that are involved would tell us a little bit about that, because I think it sounds wonderful and much needed.
Yeah, well, in 2015, I think we started a working group, Terminology, because we were made aware from people outside that we have a collection of more than 1 million objects, and we have a very through our website you can see most of the descriptions. And they're, for a large part, they just come from the old inventory books. So there was really a lot of catching up to do, because there were a lot of words that were not up to date with our language still present in these descriptions. And then we started the working group. Stephanie is part of it as well. And I always say we're condemned to each other for life, because language is changing all the time. So we talk a lot about it's often easier to say what words you don't want to use anymore than what's the good replacement. So we take it term by term or word by word. But of course, we've made decisions in the past that we now look at in a different way. So it's something that we we were shaken up, and it will something that will I think we will be busy with it for forever. But it really is worthwhile. It takes a lot of time, but it's text labels should not irritate you, or they should help you to look at art or to objects. And if the language used in the text labels, so the working group looks at the sort of inventory text that you can find on the website, but also on text labels in the galleries. And of course, and that's what we worked on with the exhibition. We spoke a lot about the text labels. You shouldn't feel that it's that the text is telling about you, but it should, you should feel part of history or the text, and that's very important. So that's a big project.
Sounds wonderful. I'm just going to remind everyone again, you can just raise your hand with the Zoom function if you have a question. So another question that I have is around the fact that you engage contemporary artists and especially create space at the end for audiences to sort of process some of the emotion that that they will have developed during the exhibition. And I think it's so clear from every aspect of this exhibition, whether you're thinking about the personalities, the 10 sort of identities that you recover, and also the audiences, that empathy undergirds everything you're doing. You know, this is an extremely thoughtful and empathetic exhibition. So I wonder, can you tell us a little bit about that space for at the end for reflection and for sort of emotion, and your decision to work with contemporary artists as a sort of intervention in this history?
Well, maybe that's one of the lessons of Good Hope, that we felt that the audience had saw the exhibition and then they were sent out of the museum and there was no, we also got that message back that people felt that they wanted to say something about what they saw and what they read. So that's, that's why we from the beginning said there should be something in the end of the exhibition that, that helps the visitor to somehow work with what he's seen in the exhibition. And it's really nice, like Valika said, to make new objects. So it's the exhibition was for us a search for objects to tell this story. But together with the audience, we want to add new objects to this national history of slavery. And the visitors are invited to work with the artist, David Bade and Tirso Marta, on 10 new statues, but you can hardly call it a statue, I guess, because they're really, they have ideas of installations, and I think they're all, you can look at the process through a webcam. So it's also something that you can follow when you, after you got home and you want to see what other people are making of your, like you've worked on the Sapali statue, for example, you look at it a few weeks later, see what has come from it. But maybe Stephanie or Valika wants to add to it then.
We have a question from Heather. Want to unmute yourself?
Hi, thanks everyone for talking about your experience at the exhibition. It's good to see you all. I had a question, this might be a straightforward question or not, but about the title of the exhibition. In North America, the titles often tend to be very, they take a format of short title, colon, elaboration afterwards. And I'm always observing Rijksmuseum titles tend to be very brief and to the point, and I was especially struck by that in this case. And so I wanted to know what your thoughts were, or maybe the marketing department, on how you came to something that was so direct, and what feedback you got about that, because I know you were also working with audiences and thinking about the conception of the exhibition.
Well, we spoke a lot about subtitles, but we wanted to tell so much. I think we wanted to, should we address the fact that it's personal stories and not a sort of overview of history of slavery? Should we address the fact that it was transatlantic slavery, but also Indian Ocean region? So I think in the end, but maybe my colleagues can help me, but it just, we thought this is what it is. And it's good to have a really straightforward title. Yeah.
I think what's also important to realize is that the Netherlands, if you could call it that, there's kind of a division, because in schools, people don't learn much about slavery. But then there's this group of people who have a personal descent from slavery, or who come from the Caribbean part of the kingdom and who know a lot about this history, and who feel it's a direct connection to their personal stories, against the people who have learned very little about it, know very little about it, and feel, is this really part of my history? Should I have feelings about this? What's it to me? So it's really difficult to try and engage both sides of that story. And in the end, it made us choose for a short, just straightforward title that everybody will learn more about once they're here. But our main goal is to get them in. And we know that they will come because it is something, the heritage of this whole history, the inequality in our today's society is and the way that we relate to our history is something that dominates the newspapers every day, and that is in part of popular discourse every day. So there's this imbalance between, we talk about it a lot, but a lot of people know very little about it. So it's that having both of those groups in your head at the same time sometimes makes us a bit schizophrenic. But in the end, we chose to do it short and sweet and try and get them in, and hopefully through the engagement through empathy, we will engage people in wanting to learn more about this history.
Thank you.
We have now a question from Michael Phillip.
Hello. Yeah. Thank you very much for this introduction in your exhibition. I hope I will be able to visit Amsterdam and to see this exhibition. I've not really a question, but a statement regarding the aspect of art and history. I'm curator at the Museum Barberini in Potsdam, and right now we are housing the exhibition Rembrandt's Orient, curated by Gary Schwartz. And this exhibition focuses on Rembrandt and on art. So, and we are not able to show things like slavery or violence in art because it was not painted as artworks. So, but we do a lot of comments that we are missing these aspects of the history. And we also are avoiding terms like Golden Age or the Oriental, and we are very much reflecting the texts. And this exhibition is also accompanied by a series of interviews I made with some experts like Stephanie Archangel, and it's seen on our website. And all these efforts are very much welcomed by the audience. So on the online video tools we do, and also the visitors of the website. And right now we are just not open for some days before closing again. But also the audience in the museum is very happy about mentioning these aspects which are not shown in art. And so I think it's possible to bring these aspects to the audience, even if you can't show it in the artworks. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. So the exhibition shall open soon, we are confident, and will run until August 30th. I'm very jealous of those in Europe that will have the chance to see it. I want to thank you all so much, but I want to make sure that there's nothing I have not asked or anything, or to give you the last word, so to speak, just in case. Otherwise, I'll thank you all so much and congratulate you on what is surely I think, one of the most important exhibitions of this decade. And yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you all.
You're welcome.
Goodbye, everyone.